And my mantra was that good decisions, bad decisions, and even if they're not my decisions, I had to take responsibility or credit for them. So even if it's a negative, I had to take the blame. And my logic was very simple, very simple. If I didn't, people would go around me. They would diminish the role I was in because they wouldn't see me as the final arbiter. And if I'm not the final arbiter, people always defer to the person who's going to get or try to contact the person who's going to get the job done. So there's a lot of things that I had to take responsibility for that I was not actually responsible for or completely disagreed with, but did in order to maintain that sense of authority over my job and area. And no regrets, but it's just the way it works, you know? It's just the way it works.
Hi, this is Adam Freeman, and you are watching or listening to Comic Industry Insiders, a podcast that we started almost exactly a year ago to talk to the people behind the scenes in the comic book industry, the people who make things run, and to get to know what it is that makes them tick and what you can take for your business or career in comics. And I've given some version of that intro now 52 times, 1 year. Listen, we're really excited that this has been a year. 1 year was actually the goal that we gave ourselves to build this channel. And I think based on your feedback and the overwhelmingly wonderful response that we've gotten from both inside the comic book industry and for people that are just interested in it, it's been a success. There's no question. In fact, I pulled up a few stats here that are, for anything that wasn't as niche-y as our little podcast, these would be maybe anemic, but man, I am so genuinely grateful for the 5,000 plus podcast downloads. Those of you I talk to all the time who listen to us in your car, maybe you are right now. I just heard from one of our favorites, Koo, who told me that he is listening to it while he's on airplanes running at 1.5 speed, which I think means that maybe I sound like Mickey Mouse. On YouTube, we're looking at 12,000 views and 271 subscribers. Now, why is 271 exciting? That's not a lot of people, right? But I told our crew when we got started, I said, listen, the right 200 people in the comic book industry can make a company, right? The right 200 shops inside of that are buying a publisher can legitimately make that publisher a reality. And so I said 200 people, that's all we need, 200. And well, we're at 271, 1 year in. We have, on our 52nd episode, the only man who could be number 52 and number one in our hearts, Mr. Dan DiDio. I'm talking to you from the end of Comics Pro, and we're going to be dissecting that for a while because it was super exciting. The comic book industry right now is on fire. Anyway, cannot wait for you to listen to this episode, and I can't wait to talk to you again soon. Thank you all so much for watching and for listening and for letting us know how much it means to you. All right.
Thanks for having me. Let me clarify one thing on the number 52 first, though. Okay.
Okay.
Two
go
things.
ahead. All right.
For the weekly series, granted, the weekly series was my idea, top to bottom, but the person who named it 52 was Paul Levitz. Okay, we were struggling for a name, and he goes, "Well, it's 52 weeks. We'll just call it." I kept on saying it's 52. I kept on saying it's 52 this, 52 that. He goes, "Just call it 52." So he named the series, and then when we did the new 52, I had 48 books, and it was going to be the Great 48 or something ridiculous like that. And Jim Lee leads in. He goes, "Listen, we've had a lot of luck and success with the number 52. Let's get to 52." So yeah. To be honest, the two people that christened the names were actually Paul and Jim on the sides of me. Okay, I got stuck with the middle, but they're the ones that can push the titles on us. All right.
All right. I'll take that. I'll take that as fair. But you know that like there's no way to separate you from that. I mean, that is
I know.
legitimately you shifted the whole paradigm. I think with that idea. So obviously, it obviously came from a place of knowing how all this works.
Yeah.
Well, let's dig right into that though. I mean, normally we try and push this back a little bit, but what what caused you to want to think a weekly comic series would work, and what problem did it solve?
You know what? It solved a lot of problems. It created a lot of problems. Okay, to be honest
Sure.
with you, that's the interesting thing about everything. Um, I came from animation, all right, and my goal was to create product that was equal to the distribution, the speed of the distribution system. So if we're delivering books every week, therefore my belief was that we should put something out on a weekly basis to be that one go-to centerpiece every week that somebody had to go to. We needed that, that book that everybody had to target and then find other series around that. So that was the game plan. It was the idea to create something that was a destination book every week. We had our Wednesday Warriors. So I wanted to have something that they could look for every week, and I wanted to create a series that fit that need. Okay, so that was the high concept. And what I did is I took what was an animation model, which was a writer's room and storyboard artists, and then ultimately people to execute the actual art. But that way we were able to move the system along so that if one person or something hit a bump along the way, we had other ways to compensate for that to ensure the book running on schedule. Keith Giffen always said it best. He said the 52 weekly series was like NASCAR. Most people were buying in, waiting for it to crash, and we never crashed. No matter how many things that came up and any challenges that came along the way, we actually never crashed, which was pretty amazing.
That it really truly was. Are you saying though that like I know there was a crew, there was basically a writer's room, and
Right.
I mean again I would say that it's not an uncommon instance in publishing now to have a lot of people. I was just at a story conference for another publisher we're working on and working with, and that model has been there for a while. But are you saying that like you guys were doing storyboards in the way that animation works, that sort of workflow
Yeah,
for the
absolutely. Yeah,
comics?
yeah. What happened was the guys would write the script. Keith Giffen would thumbnail the entire script. Okay, so we'd have thumbnails on the entire script, and it would go to an artist. But if an artist ran late or was in trouble, we could take those thumbnails and push them to another artist because we knew that we had a consistency in storytelling that was all the way through. So that way we had artists that forced the artists to stay pretty much consistent with the layouts. So they had to maintain a
Yeah.
certain order to the layouts, but it also brought that sense of continuity from issue to issue, and that's why if you watch it, read it as a reading experience, even as a book of 52 issues, it doesn't feel jarring going from one issue to the next because artistically we were matching styles and we had one person that was really laying out the entire book.
No kidding. Wow. Did you have anybody push back on that? I mean, I would imagine that considering the artists, some of the artists I've worked with, I imagine that I can think of some of them going, no, I'm not doing that.
That comes later. That comes
Yeah.
later.
Okay.
But in the beginning, because it was so new and we were moving so quickly, in
Yeah.
some ways, a lot of the artists were very appreciative of having the layouts. The only book that we really went ahead on was with Phil Jimenez on issue 50. 50 was the big World War III issue. So that one
Yeah.
actually jumped ahead, and that was given time to work on when the rest of them were on a much more organized and methodical schedule.
Wow. Okay. Well, that is very cool. I'm so glad we went down that rabbit hole. I'll tell you, normally I usually start these conversations with something that's a little off track of what we're going to talk about or a very deep cut. But this week there was really no way for me to start the conversation without asking you, how grateful are you to not be anywhere near comics, an executive comics role when the Diamond announcement happened this past week?
But, the diamond thing, that's it's heartbreaking to me a little bit. We
Yeah.
used to have meetings and plans in anticipation
Sure.
if that ever happened. Um, and so that was intriguing to hear that announcement because some of the plans would have been in place to manage that. You don't want to see that happen. Um, I have a lot of, as you imagine, I would have a lot of opinions on this, but
Of course.
the biggest thing I say on all this, and I don't really talk about it this much anymore, but my biggest issue right now is we still have it backwards. We still have the industry backwards. Um, the right order of the industry is no exclusives to any retailer on the publishing side. And ultimately that would give every distributor the opportunity to distribute everything, and then the stores would be able to pick and choose and match with what distributor works best to their interests and their style of running their store and the material that they run in their store.
Hmm.
So as long as we continue to push the exclusive nature of publisher to distributor, the system will never be healthy, in my opinion, because I just feel that that level of competition on the distribution side is where the gains can be made, and you might get a smaller discount as a publisher, but you might have greater opportunity with multiple distributors. I remember the '90s really well, and
Sure.
before the Heroes World happened, and what I remember was stores opening in conjunction with distributors, not with publishers. Meaning that if there was a store from Cap Cities that supplied Cap Cities a comic shop, all of a sudden a diamond related comic shop would open in a similar proximity with different styles of product and a little different wear, but a lot of the same material. And that gave me as a consumer different choices on where to go shopping and where to do it. And ultimately, discounts and things like that, and sales and that would be driving me into a store. Right now, everything's on such a razor thin um, profit margin that you can't really do all the tricks to attract new readers or attract new buyers because
Right.
everybody's working on such small margins. I'm sorry.
100%.
Did I go? Was that a deep?
No,
How's that for a deep cut for you, man?
that is perfect. You have found exactly the perfect place to talk about that. That is fascinating. I want to dig a little deeper into that, and I thought this was just going to be a quick offhand comment. Let's. So what you're saying is your feeling is that a publisher, let's say DC, but let's not even leave it limited to that. Let's say some large
Yeah.
publisher should be able to set up with multiple distributors, and each one of those distributors would have a different deal, right?
Correct.
And
Yeah.
each one of them you would get a different margin from, or you would give different services to. There would be a different negotiation back and forth, and then the retailer would get to pick, this one has a better discount, but this one has better
Yeah.
marketing, and this one has better services. I mean,
Exactly.
that's what you're envisioning.
If you're a periodical store, there might be a better distributor just for periodicals. If you're a collected edition graphic novel store, there might be one that has a better relationship on that side, where your priorities lies. One might have better ancillary material, all the support merchandising. Again, it creates opportunity. The only reason why we're in this rabbit hole is because Marvel bought Heroes World, and
Yeah.
that's what forced the collapsing of the entire marketplace. And it did. Stores closed. When retailers went out of business, stores went out of business with the retailer. So it is what it is. But I think we're I think we are so used to a certain system we don't stop and go back. I used to argue this. I'm sorry, we're going into a weird spot, but I'm
I
having fun
love
with this.
this. Go.
But
Just keep
it goes
going.
back. It goes back to my argument about retailers asking for returnability. And I say,
Sure.
okay, you can get. What I used to say is, you can have returnability, but you'll have it at a different discount because you're changing the paradigm. The system is created a certain way. The whole system's built on non-returnability, and the discounts are built on non-returnability and not overprinting and things of that nature. But if you want returnability, great, I love it, but don't expect the same discount. See, what the problem is that you keep on making minor changes to a system that was built a certain way. And if you're really going to want to take it apart, you got to take it all the way apart and then put it back together in a way that makes sense. And that's how you could grow and get healthy again rather than constantly struggling through all these bumps along the way. You know?
Hmm.
Sorry.
I want to push back on that a little bit. It
Sure.
seems because all those little variations, right? Those are people trying to innovate. They're thinking of new ideas. They're trying to
Yeah.
maybe get a bit more sales or sculpt, shave a bit more margin or whatever on both sides, right? Um, And I think that stuff happens incrementally. You can't ask
Right.
everything to be broken down every time that those incremental changes
Oh, no,
happen, right?
I'm just saying that. I'm just saying that right now we're in such a broken state, and then when you
Oh yeah,
lose a major, when you're losing a major moment like this gives you a chance to reflect. That's what I'm saying. It's obviously we've been
sure.
going down certain roads that unfortunately gets us into a place where there's so much instability that you really want to just stop and pull it back for a second and go, how did we get here? I used to do this all the time. Um, and it goes to my favorite question at a convention. Um, why did you make a book that sucked? People ask you, why are you doing this book? It sucks. And my answer used to be, well, when we set out to make it, we didn't actually plan it on it being a sucky book. It sort of just happens. And
Yeah.
honestly, and it's what I call the death by a thousand cuts. You make a lot of compromises so far along the way that you're so far off track that you have to reset. And that gets you back to New 52.
Yeah.
Everything's connected.
Exactly. Everything's connected. All right. Well, let's go back a little bit, if you don't mind,
Okay.
because I'd love to talk a little bit. Because for many of us who have worked in comics throughout your career, you seemingly came from nowhere. I'll be honest. Like it was like, who is this guy suddenly?
You said
Um,
that to my mother. She'd get in real trouble.
I'm sure. Yeah. But so tell me about this early. So you really just you said you started in animation,
Yeah.
and you have some pretty major credits in a really fantastic reboot.
Hmm.
And when I was looking this up, there was Action Man, which I hadn't heard of.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. That was, yeah.
yeah, tell me about that period. Tell me about how you. Hey, let's talk about how you get into animation at first. Where do you start? Like, what kind of draws you into that place?
Okay. Well, it's a long road. I mean, if you listen, I've always loved comics. That's the thing. I've collected comics since I was 10 years old. I love comics. I always wanted to work in comics. I have tons of rejection letters throughout the years while I was submitting material, poorly submitting material. That's why I'm
Right.
very aware of the proper way to send things in. But I used to send things in without any knowledge, and it was during the remember. Okay, you know what I say? I remember, but I can't take that for granted anymore. The 80s are 40 years ago. Remember, I was going to say,
Oh,
remember
I
that black
know.
and white boom? Remember that black and white boom in the 80s?
Yes, I do because I'm an old man and I was there for it. Yes.
But there used to be all these magazines and all that, and I used to buy everything and cut out all the submission places and send letters in, send pitches in, and I got a couple of things printed along the way. Um, and just on the comic book side, one of my closest friends is Jimmy Palmiotti. We lived in the same building in Brooklyn together, and we met at one of the local comic shops. Realized we're in the same building. Jimmy was my pusher when he used to get his comp boxes. I used to go over there and pick out the stuff that he didn't want, which was really fun. Because we got the chance to buy a bunch of books I couldn't afford in those days.
Yeah.
But I was working in I started as an accounting major in college, and I realized quickly that wasn't for me. But I was always good with numbers, and I was always good with really statistics and things of that nature. That was where my interests were. So I gravitated and I moved into TV radio business, thinking I was going to get into statistical business and ratings analysis and all that stuff going on there. Lo and behold. What I really wanted was animation. I love cartoons. That's probably my super sweet spot, even more so than even comics. I became friends with someone who worked with me, who came out of the children's division. And over a period of time, she had moved back to California, and then after multiple attempts of trying to make it into children's programming in ABC, after 10, 11 years with ABC, I make the move out to California. Joined ABC Children's Television, was their director of their lineup, their scheduling and development. Worked on shows like Tales from the Crypt Keeper. Then I was working on Reboot at the time. I worked on Madeline, a live action version of Fudge. A lot of fun stuff. I did the last after school special, and I did the last Schoolhouse Rock. To be honest,
Wow.
yeah, I worked on the last two of those, which were kind of didn't know it at the time, but that's what it was. Then when Disney came in, they pretty much shut my department down. And the folks at Reboot Mainframe offered me a script editing job. So I moved over there, started working on Reboot. Then I helped develop Beast Machines, starting on that. And then because I was running the Hasbro relationship, and that's where Action Man comes in. And then I started the Mattel relationship, which brings Barbie in, which is still one of the funniest moments at Mainframe. We actually had to separate the Barbie crew from the Action Man crew. They weren't allowed to interact, and we had to have special doors set up. And of course, every animator created the most compromising positions between Action Man and Barbie throughout the entire building.
I have no doubt. I
had a blast.
no
I had a
doubt.
blast working on that. And then ultimately, as the story goes, I'm on a plane on 9/11. I took out of Newark Airport that morning, flew into Toronto and got stuck in Toronto 5 days. Couldn't get out. Had to drive home. And I was flying about 3 weeks out of the month between going to Vancouver and Toronto and Europe and one trip to South Korea, and it was just killing me. So I actually wanted to get back on the East Coast. I had a friend of mine who knew I was into comics. He was head of Warner Brothers Animation at the time, and I was going to meet him for to have dinner with him, and he's sitting with Paul Levitz. He's sitting with Paul Levitz, and he goes, "Dan, you know Paul." And I had met Paul early on. I had actually worked with Jeanette Kahn and Louise Simonson on developing Metal Men for an animated series that would have went if Disney didn't buy ABC. And I met Paul during those days, and my friend introduces us. He goes, "Paul's looking for somebody with outside experience but comic knowledge. Dan, you're looking to get back on the East Coast. You have comic knowledge." He goes, "Why don't you two have dinner? I'm going to a different table." So I like to say I got the job at DC on a blind date with Paul Levitz.
You got parent trapped into a job at DC. That's crazy.
And to Paul's credit, he didn't know what to do with me. He thought this was something interesting there. So I did actually six interviews with Paul over a 3 or 4 month period of time, just trying to figure it out. And it was interesting because I was doing a lot of thoughts and ideas and writing and listening and doing this. And then they created a position for me called VP of Editorial. To this day, I'm still not sure what I was responsible for, but I had a title. I got into masthead. I thought that was kind of cool. And honestly, I spent a lot of time, just listening and making suggestions and trying to understand it. And then by the end of the first year, I don't feel like I belong, to be honest with you. So I'm ready to quit and try to get back into animation. They invested. I felt that it was fair. And Paul invested time and energy on me, a lot of time. I put together basically a dissertation of what I thought would be helpful to reorganize DC and go forward. And he basically pushed my resignation aside and said, "If you do this with these couple of changes, would you stay?" And one of those changes was me taking the position of executive editor. And there's that moment. Okay, I'm going to say this to you because I think everybody has this moment. When you're a kid, there's like 3 or 4 jobs you want, right? When you're a kid, and I wanted to be an astronaut, but I'm never going to get in a spaceship ever. Free of heights. I wanted to work in television programming. Believe it or not, I had this thing about when I was a kid about television programming. It's a long story. Alan King. That's a rabbit hole you don't want to go down. But I loved it.
All right.
I used to track Fred Silverman's career, so it was interesting to get a chance to work with him when I did. And the other one was comic book editor publishing. I always saw that something. And I always used to read all the bullpen and all the meanwhiles from Dick Giordano and publishorials from Jeanette Kahn and everything from all these guys. And I love the backstory and history of comics. So when somebody offers you the job that you as a kid dreamed of, there's that moment of just, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to say. And And
Hang
realistically
on, Mom's
speaking,
going to wake me up for school here in a minute.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It's weird because you're right. I came out of nowhere. I think I came out of someplace, but a lot of people thought I came out of nowhere for sure. And I loved all the conspiracy theories of where I was coming, how I was being placed there. But it was just a series of circumstances that got me to a spot. And in hindsight, I could say this now. Given the people in those positions beforehand, I was unqualified in theory, but I never felt that way myself. But I had a real clear idea of what needed to be done. As I like to say, the best part about DC, and I can't say this enough, and I don't think anybody says it enough. The quality of people working there in New York at that time when I started was what was I saying? Was beyond reproach. These were some of the nicest, sweetest, smartest people I ever dealt with in my life, and I can't speak highly enough. There was, I worked with guys like Bob Wayne, naturally, who was in charge of sales, and we had a really contentious relationship at the start that developed into something that was a real, true friendship. There was Terry Cunningham, who, in my opinion, was my guru in a weird way. She was the one I used to go into the office when I'm having meltdowns, and she was able to help me focus, get me on track. So much so that when we moved out of New York, I kept her couch because it was my comfort spot. She took it home. I wouldn't let them move it.
Aww.
Then
So
there was
sweet.
Allison Gill, and then there was Richard Bruning, and then again, the person I can't speak enough about is Karen Berger. I watched Karen Berger in her role as executive Vertigo, and such poise and smartness and calmness and just creativity. Like I said, all these really wonderful people dealing with. I was this giant sponge at DC, just taking it all in and just trying to understand how the behind the scenes worked. And I always loved behind the scenes of comics. I worked with guys like Marv Wolfman and Len Wein in animation, not because I wanted them to write animation, which they were great at, but because I wanted to hear their comic book stories in between scripts.
Yeah. I got invited to a poker game that Marv was a regular at once, and I wasn't able to make it, and it still kills me to this day. I mean, I've met Marv a few times over the years. I had a comic shop in LA, so it happens. But yeah, it kills me that I didn't get to that.
Yeah. Strangely enough, Len's aunt was a friend of my sister of the family, and I knew his aunt really well. And when I was a kid, they put me on the phone with him, and I must be about 5 or 6, whatever, how many years younger than him at the time, but he put me on the phone with him. I told him about my interest in working in comics, like as a 13-year-old, and I never forgot his words. "Don't get in comics, kid; it'll break your heart." And when I did meet him again later on in life, he tells me, I can't tell you how many times it's broken my heart.
You weren't wrong. My heart has been broken. It's interesting to me is that you really did bridge that gap of what is kind of, from the executive side anyway, kind of old DC to new DC. Mm-hmm. Right? We saw that big shift, right? Yeah. Just post really about the move from Burbank to Burbank, and then for a while, it took a while for that to really set in. Where do you think? I mean, you've been away from it now long enough. Your NDAs are probably all done. What do you feel like is the biggest shift from those two eras? And I'd love to hear, pros and cons of each, right?
Listen, there's pros and cons. Listen, I was a corporate kid for a long time. I was at CBS for 5 years, ABC for 11 years, then another 5 or 6 years with Mainframe in a very corporate environment. Not really, but I mean, it was a corporate environment. And so I'm very familiar working with the corporate, that's where I'm from. So DC and New York, everybody there loved comics. Simple as that. They were there because they wanted to work in comics. Pure and simple. There were people working jobs that they could get paid more working in a supermarket or a fast food joint, but they wanted to be at DC working in comics, and they loved it. And not a complaint, not a knock, not anything. That's what they wanted to do. And that love of comics is both good and bad, as you know. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
As you can only imagine, it keeps you bound in a common sensibility, but sometimes you lose sight of the bigger picture that comes along with that. Working in a corporate environment, because ultimately you still have responsibilities to a company that you have to meet. It goes back to the 52 weekly series. Why did you follow it up with Countdown to Final Crisis? Well, we followed up because 52 worked really well. And when 52 ended, they asked me what books are going to replace the books that you're not making anymore, with the same level of sales. Very simple. It's a very simple argument. And I'd love to say, we want to take a couple of months, couple of years off. Let us have a chance to enjoy these stories. And they're like, well, you made the problem in any corporate environment is that you make X, and they're going to make you to ask X plus 10% the next year. And then you can pat yourself on the back because you make that 10%. And you know what they ask you for? Okay, now let's put another 10% on that. And ultimately, that's when you start to go, wait a minute, you're getting penalized for your own success, ultimately. But they don't really care. They don't really care. So when you get to California, it's a different sensibility. And you could tell everybody was playing to a different audience. We were playing to the studio, not to ourselves. We weren't playing to the comic fans. We weren't playing to the comic audience. We're playing to a different, bigger stage, because that's the golden fruit that was being dangled at us. And ultimately, it forces you to lose track of what you're doing and who you're doing it for sometimes, especially with our audience as it goes.
Yeah. No, I can definitely see that. I'd love to come back to that, but you and I've been talking already, and I already have several things that pins that I want to run back to. If you don't mind, really quickly, let's snip off some of those threads. Where was this building in Brooklyn? Because I'm currently in Brooklyn.
Oh, it's in Sheepshead Bay, Gerritsen Beach.
Okay, I know that area.
Yeah, we had there's a little store that we went to on Nostrand Avenue. I think the owner's name was Richie. This guy, really nice. It was one of the few stores that it was nice, open air, and it was just fun to be around. I actually worked in a comic shop in the 70s, believe it or not. It was a small 70s. Shop. Yeah, 70s. Wow. 1977, 78. It was a comic shop. It was a small store on Avenue D in Brooklyn, all the way down towards Eastern Parkway, down there. I was down in that neighborhood, and I got the job mainly because I was afraid of missing comics. Can you believe it? I took it because I was afraid. I'm going to tell you which one too. I was afraid. I missed Howard the Duck #1. That motherfucker. And
ruined your fucking life. I'm not having Howard the Duck.
I swear, I missed Howard the Duck #1, and I said, I swear to God, I ain't never missing the comic that I want again. I couldn't find that book anywhere, and I certainly wasn't going to spend $10 for #1 after 25 cents the week before. Oh no! Just my answer to that was working in a comic shop, so I got first crack at everything.
You truly are always solving problems. I think that might become the theme of what I'm seeing here throughout Dan DiDio's life. Okay. You mentioned submitting the wrong way, and that you have theories now on submitting the right way. What is that? Because we get that actually. I get that question a lot. Yeah.
Oh yeah, my wrong way is that you send a fully thought out story, beginning, middle, and end. This big diatribe, not realizing what the medium you're working in. You know what I mean? And so you think I'm turning in a prose story as a pitch for a comic, and that wasn't right. You know what I mean? And I didn't break down characters. I didn't give you a log line, a top line idea about it. You're basically asking the person to read the entire piece to make a judgment upon what you're sending in. And that's a huge mistake, because nobody's going to get past that first line most of the times, especially if they get taught. And they don't certainly want to read 7, especially when they're out to soliciting material. They're going to look for that first or second line to grab them, and then they might go in deeper. And I was, and the other thing too is that the other one that I tell everybody never to make the mistake in is be coy. I hate being coy. And you can't believe what's going to happen next. You have to read to see what, you know what I mean? It's like, I don't give a shit what happens next. I don't even give a shit about this. Let me move on.
Oh, I know what happens next. It's that guy.
Exactly.
Next.
We're done.
Cool. That's actually two big good pieces. All right. So you went to Paul Levitz. You said, "Listen, I don't know if this is working out. I think I'm going to go, but here's a list of changes I think you should make on my way out.
Yeah.
Trying to do the right thing." And he says, "All right, let's shift this one, and this one, and I want you to come in at whatever title you want." Right.
Right.
What were the changes that were the ones that I'd love to hear the ones that he needed you to shift and the ones that actually you got to do or attempt, at least attempt.
I was trying to organize what I did. Again, it goes into production in this. What I did is what I wanted to do is understand the capacity of the studio. I called DC a studio. It's a full studio. I wanted to know what the capacity of the studio was to make sure we were producing to capacity. Okay? Meaning that we were taking advantage of everything so that way people weren't doing it. Because what happens sometimes, and I have to back up. There's a story that goes before the story, okay? And the story is this. I did a breakdown. And I was looking at profitability of comics, okay? And I think at that point, we're at $225, $250 a book. And then we were doing prestige novels, like about $5, $6, something like that. And then you're doing hardcovers about $20, something like that. And I said, looking at these three models, 40,000 periodicals makes the same money as 25,000 prestige and 10,000 hardcovers. And I went to editorial and I said, what should we be putting our energies into? Okay. And everybody came back. A lot of people came back and said, listen, we should do more hardcovers. Got better quality stock. They're not on a deadline. You can take your time and do that. I said, great. Okay. Now we lose 5,000 readers. Now I got 35,000 people reading periodicals, 20,000 reading this, and only 5,000 people reading a book, and we're out of business. So the fact that you're taking this for granted, the 10,000 number is great, but if you don't make that number where you lose people over the period of time, you have no leeway. I said, we have to put our energy into the periodical. And then when I said that, I said, and one of the biggest bugaboos I had when I first got there was I would have these prestige books. They would have these prestige books in process. And you're checking, and there's been no movement on any of the artist story in weeks. And then lo and behold, that artist is doing a cover over at Marvel and doing a fill-in over at Marvel. Mm-hmm. And I call everybody up and I'm like, what's going on? What's happening? Why is this happening? And the artist, perfectly honest, would say, well, nobody gave me a deadline at DC. Marvel gave me this so I could do this work in front of your work and still have work waiting for me. And what Marvel would do is they keep on throwing more work, so that book became later and later and later. And there was no urgency to do the DC work because there was no deadlines given. I said, okay, that's got to end. We got to put everybody on schedule. And then I realized the Marvel editors were much more aggressive than the DC editors and calling people constantly. And so that's when I started putting everybody on exclusive. And that's when the exclusive war started. To the point that I think at maximum, we had I think our top line was 147 exclusives contracts. But if you think about it, at any given time, you might have close to 400 to 500 people working for you in some various shape across the entire line. You know what I mean? Just put it in perspective. But that's how.
So 25%.
Yeah. So what I did, I basically got more aggressive on all. I told them we have to get more aggressive. We have to be more aggressive in what our expectations are as an individual, and more aggressive what our expectations are as a line, and also be much more aggressive in how we deal with our talent. And we are going to go out of our way to improve their conditions. I'm going to go out of the way to improve your rates. I'm going to try to find a way to improve the paper stock, so therefore your material is printed better. But in return, this is what we want. And if we didn't get that, then we didn't work together.
Yeah. I imagine that a really well-established crew like they had at DC, that sort of push, that people like to use the word disruptor, a lot. It must have felt disruptive. It must have gotten a lot of pushback.
Oh yeah,
right?
yeah. Nobody liked me.
That's
Listen,
fair.
you know, two things I'm never going to win is a beauty contest and a popularity contest. But but one thing I will do is accomplish what I set out to do.
I don't know, man. For a man your age, I think you look fantastic. So I think
Yeah.
you're doing
I'm
you're
really
doing
getting old
okay.
now. I have to say, I'm getting killed. I got 5 grandkids right now that are wearing me down, man. I tell you, 5 grandkids. Yeah,
Says, oh,
yeah,
jeez.
that's
One
great.
other thing I'd love to do before we kind of catch up in the storyline.
Sure.
You mentioned a whole lot of names, and thank you so much. And I, you mentioned Bob, who's been a long time friend and even mentor at times for me. There was a name that I've recently started hearing. I think just because I didn't process it well enough, but Allison Gill. You
Oh,
mentioned her.
Allison. Well, first
And
of all, she's one of the greats. Oh, she's actually one of the comic book greats. I'm going to say that
yeah,
right now. Yeah, comic book greats. Yeah.
tell us why. Tell us why.
Okay. Allison Gill was my Scotty, I used to call her. Not only because she had a British accent. Scotty doesn't work, but that's it. The analogy works really well when I get to it. So Allison was in charge of production, and honestly, the company ran as well as it did because Allison ran production as well as she did. Nobody has run it better. Can run anything better than her. And I'm saying this right out. And honestly, when you talk about a popularity contest, the person who I think would win any popularity contest is Allison Gill because she is universally loved and rightfully so from Marvel and DC. I used to love her when I first got there because she used to work at Marvel UK, and I wanted to hear Marvel UK stories like nobody's business. But she'd be the one that you'll hear this from other people. I come up with pretty crazy ass ideas a lot of times. It's just spontaneous insanity.
Sure.
And I would come in and I would, like, even with 52 and all these things, I would go in and give the big song and dance, be up at the top of the table, ranting and raving, trying to get everybody's attention to see this works. And Alice would be the one to be quiet. We can't do this. And then, like, half hour later, she'd be in my office. Okay, this is how it's going to work. And she would figure it out, And she would also be the one, and I'm going to put this on her. She's the one that goes, Dan, look at this new technology. Lenticular covers, these type of things. This is what they're showing me. And I'm like, we could make something with that. So she was just as studious as I was coming from the other side, trying to find ways to make it work. And my joke, which wasn't a joke, was if Allison's worried, then we really have something to be concerned about. If Allison's not worried, I'm perfectly okay. She was my barometer. She was the one that if I looked at her and I said, are we okay? And she'd go, yep, we're okay. Then I believed it. And never, you get people give you that story, that song and dance, like, oh, yeah, we're fine. And meanwhile, the whole ship is burning and you're about to find out your ass is on fire.
This is fine.
Never the case with her.
I have no doubt.
Yeah, but that's Allison's. She's a real wonder. Actually, I'm going to see her this weekend. She lives actually close to where my son lives, so we get a chance to get together whenever I'm in town, which is a lot of fun. Yeah.
Oh, right on. Well, it's been suggested to me a couple times that I need to meet Allison, so I think at some point I would absolutely love to do that.
Oh yeah, you got to see River. She starts in Marvel UK in bars with Alan Moore and all those guys, and it goes all the way back to over here.
Oh yeah. Okay. Yeah. All right.
Okay?
Excellent.
Yeah,
All right. She's been at it. Mm-hmm. So you tell me about the period when the word comes down, when it finally does happen, that you're moving from New York to Burbank. I have to imagine that for you, this is like, God damn it, I came here to get on the East Coast.
Exactly. It's so much true. Well, it's actually even worse than that, if you want to be perfectly honest.
Sure.
I sort of knew when we took on the publisher position, I sort of knew we were they wanted to move us. Okay. Mainly because the executive staff was there, and I sort of knew that was the case. And I was getting myself ready for it. And as the story goes, Flashpoint was created to handle the publishing move originally. we thought it was going to happen then. That's what was going to happen. So we created Flashpoint, and we built Flashpoint, and then lo and behold, through a series of circumstances, they changed their mind. They said we weren't going to move. Everything's going to be fine. We're going to only move a portion of the company. They moved the toy guys and a few other people, but publishing was going to stay on New York. And I said, "Are you sure? Because if I am, I'm buying a house." Okay. And so they said, "Yeah, no, we're not moving." we publish, we make Flashpoint, and then we do New 52, and it's such a big success, and everything's working well. They said, "Hey, guess what? We're going to move you guys again." And I just bought a house, and I'll be honest, we moved in April of 2015. I made my decision to move on March 31st of 2015. 2 weeks before we were supposed to move. I wasn't going. And then you have to look at the scales. You have to look at yourself. You have to look at your own career. And I'll be honest. I'll be extremely honest right now. When you're in your mid 50s, there's not much you really want to start over again and do at the level that you're working at and the pay. And to be more honest, I've been in situations where people moved, and I know how that game is played, especially in corporate world. In the corporate world, they move you. They move the high-priced people to set things up, help train the new, cheaper guy.
Yep.
And then you go. So I knew I was renting on the West Coast. I knew that in my mind. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So when we did move, I never had that same sense of ownership to everything that we did on the East Coast. Like I said, my goal then, my main goal moving on the West Coast is to make sure that the people that moved were taken care of and properly treated because they gave up their lives. And, and there was this 18-month, it was 18 months in transition from the time we decided to move to when we actually moved. And during that period of time, you're managing a ship. Okay, should I tell a story? Okay. We're managing the ship of basically who's staying, who's not going. You ever see the movie When Worlds Collide and there's the people that are working on the spaceship and not sure they're getting on or not, and then you know who the people are getting on and people aren't getting on? And we had to manage and maintain and motivate a staff on the East Coast, knowing that a lot of these guys weren't coming, that we're interviewing on the West Coast to fill their positions, and they're actually working side by side with people who are actually moving and getting excited about moving, but I don't want them too excited to make the other people feel left out. Now they're in the process of this is happening, and you're managing this for an 18-month period of time, and you could feel it was like this big kettle boiling and boiling and boiling, and we kept on finding a way to let the steam out so we didn't blow the top off it. But as I said before, the great part about the New York staff was their love of comics, and that never changed during the entire process. Even when they knew their job was ending, they still loved comics to the point that they would do anything to make sure that they continue to make them properly. And that level of professionalism and love is what kept us alive up to the move,
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I absolutely can see that. And I can see that both from the team that did make the move and that are still there. There's very few of those left, but but definitely the people that have since moved on into other positions in comics, they always have that one thing in common of having that that definite passion for comics.
Yeah.
And I think
my main goal in when I was in California is being the buffer between the company and upper management, and being the studio, and trying to keep some level of distance between the two, so that way we continue to craft the way we felt most comfortable. And that's one of the reasons why you keep your foot on that gas so hard, because you got to show success. As the best tool is success. As long as you have success, people don't want to screw it too much, but you'd be surprised. You'd still be surprised, because then, when you have success, you find out there's a lot of owners of success, even if they haven't been involved. And not as many people step up when you don't have it.
imagine so. And also, I would also imagine that once you move to Burbank, that puts you even further into that kind of Game of Thrones, just from proximity. I think you just
Yeah,
become
yeah.
part of that
I was out
game.
there before. When I was stuck between ABC and Disney, which is
Yeah.
probably the first or second worst experience of my life. Just during the process of that transfer of power, it was brutal. I mean, brutal. We were just toys in a game, and just the amount of people just sniping from both sides, pulling at you, making you choose one over the other. Was I actually put me in the hospital. I collapsed from stress. And I promised myself that would never happen again.
Oh, dude,
But
I believe
yeah,
that.
I felt a lot of that toward the end at DC. Those last months were horrific. So what are you gonna do?
I am sure, having been in, I mean, I can't imagine being at that level, but I've been in situations where, everybody on my level was hospitalized at one point or another inside of a
Yeah,
2-year period for stress related illnesses, right? I mean,
yeah.
there's
It
a
happens.
cost.
My only shame of it was I did it when it wasn't as vogue, so nobody cared. So why it's your work?
Whatever.
Exactly.
What's the
Get over
problem?
it. Move on.
I have no doubt. Well, so during that period, you just it feels like the solution to removing Levitz, or Levitz stepping away, or however that transition happened, was you and Jim became co-publishers.
Yeah.
If I'm remembering that right. And
Yep.
so tell me about. Hey, I'd love to hear about how that experience went, and I'd love specifically to hear about Jim as leader. I mean, there's so much that's said about Jim as creator.
Jim's, listen, I actually, I'm going to say this. I've said this several times. I can say this again. I mean, I love working with Jim. And honestly, this goes back to, I'm not sure if it's bad memory or just never happened. We never had a conversation about who does what or how does this work. Never. We sort of were organic. I mean, my relationship with Jim's an interesting one because I don't understand it. we get along really well. It's just, I'm like, I feel like going to Jim all the time. Why do you like me? I have no idea why you like me. We get along. But it was the funniest thing in the world. I mean, for me, the other thing, when I first got to DC, so one of the first things I did at DC as executive editor, I started poaching Wildstorm like nobody's business. I love the artists poaching, stealing their artists.
Oh, poaching. Yeah.
Poaching.
Got it.
So I kept on, and I just admired the artistic styles and sensibilities of Wildstorm and just the energy that they had. And I said, we need that energy on the DC books. And that was what's great about Jim and Scott Dunbier and John Mead. What they understood what I was doing, and they didn't hold any malice to me for pulling guys off of their books and bringing them over to DC because they knew this was a better opportunity for their guys, and they were very supportive. So that's part one. Part two is that I think I said to you I was mildly unqualified for the job, and there was a lot of things I was trying to accomplish in a very short period of time, and I was taking a lot of swings and a lot of misses. And when I first got to DC, believe it or not, there was a low energy to Hush. They weren't excited about it. They were looking at a different style, a different sensibility with the books. They were very film noir. All the Batman books were very film noir. You remember the logos were very stark, and they were going for this real, almost pulpy feel to Batman. And when Jim's pages came in, it was not matching that style, and people were not responding the way I thought. I'm looking at it like, holy shit, this looks great, And I sat there and I made sure I fought for Hush. We got the paper stock Jim wanted, and there's the infamous moment. There's a great story. Could be not even true anymore, but it's my story, so it's true. But we were in the room, and Paul at the time, somebody at the time said, and Jim goes, I want to be the Batman artist. That's what Jim said. I want to be the Batman artist. If I'm going to do this many books, I want to be the guy. I don't want to do it offshoot because they were going to do Hush like it was Long Halloween. Do it high-end paper, high-end stock over here on the left, and that way the line's going to be over here. And Jim goes, no, I want to be the Batman artist. And the answer, well, you're not going to get a number one. In those days, you just didn't get a number one because you were an artist coming on a book. And Jim, to his credit, says, but I'm going to make it sell like it's a number one. And I heard that, and I'm like, fuck yeah. That's the attitude we need at DC Comics. Hell yeah. And so made sure that he got the paper stock, made sure he got everything going on. I was rebuilding DC's relationship with Wizard Magazine at the time, which was a disaster, to the point that DC wanted to charge Wizard for any characters on the cover. It was really bad at that moment. And we rebuilt that relationship, and Hush gets coming, and boy, that thing hits like a rocket. And it allowed me to make mistakes, but all I kept on doing is pointing back to Hush going, hey, isn't this good over here? But then Hush happens, and then Superman Batman happens, then Green Lantern happens, and all of a sudden we're cooking with fire. You feel the juices coming, like, shit, we can do this. We're going to make this work. But if it wasn't for Jim, I couldn't have done that, because he's the guy. And all of a sudden, because Jim Lee's on Batman, all of a sudden became hip to be on a main book. All of a sudden, it's okay for Carlos Pacheco to be on Green Lantern. You know what I mean? All of a sudden, all these things start to happen. But that's because of Jim. And then on a personal side, Jim did something for me on a personal side that was above and beyond the Call of Duty, which I really can't get into. But he really helped me in a very big way personally. And I've been beholden to him since then. So then when we're named as co-publishers, I'm like, sure. And we never did it. And we gravitate to different things. I gravitate to the nuts and bolts of things. He gravitates to the big picture. The more, I'm more of a paper guy. He's more of a digital guy. He's more of an artist. I'm more of a writing side. So we had these two. Yeah. So there's really a wonderful complement that takes place here. And I'm kind of crazy. He's super calm. And every time I get too crazy, he calms me down, and, it's things like, so it was great. I can't find a negative on it. Honestly, I can't. That's the crazy thing about it, And I'm not saying because
I feel confident you would give it. Yeah.
Yeah. And if you want to know the truth, that's the shit I miss the most out of DC than anything else, is those relationships, more so than the work and the product, Because, you don't want to be bothering people while they're busy, and you sort of know what they're going through, but, it's kind of, you want to step in, but we always catch up at a show or something like that. I always get a chance to see him. So, we always play, and don't talk as much about comics as you would think. It's not much, just about everything else, which is fun.
But I also believe that as well. All right. Well, you mentioned Wildstorm during that period, and I'm not going to lie, it's because you're being so candid. I'm even going to try. So, I want to talk about a series that launched during that period out of Wildstorm that ended up being a massive, massive cultural hit, and specifically The Boys.
Yeah.
Now, The Boys I don't know how it sold well back then, but I remember there being, it being kind of this sleeper for Wildstorm. And then at some point, it seems that somebody actually read the book and went, oh shit, we're publishing this. And maybe that's just what it looks like from the outside. And then it went over to Dynamite, and it has since become the massive train that it is. I'm curious how inside of that you were.
Well, I was at the beginning of The Boys, if you want the truth. The Boys actually started in DCU.
Really?
With Pete Tomasi.
Okay.
And because I wanted authority-like book in the DC universe. And okay. Pete had the Goth relationship, and I believe, if I remember correctly, he started it and brought it in, and it said, let's move this over to Wildstorm. Didn't fit the DCU. Maybe it fit Wildstorm.
That was probably wise.
What? Yeah, and
then that was probably wise.
Yeah, and then it wound up being too rough for Wildstorm. Yeah, ultimately. Yeah. Yeah, but we were there at the beginning. Yeah, we were there at the beginning.
All right, fine. That's fine. I
It's
would
so
love
funny 'cause,
actually.
by the way, I
Yeah,
completely forgot that story, and Johnny's the one who reminded me. I'm like, oh shit, you're right. You know, to try to block this shit out.
it was so traumatic. You just don't even want to think about it anymore.
Yeah, there's a lot
That's
of
fair.
there was a lot of traumatic moments that you just sort of gotta go, yeah, what are you gonna do? Yeah, I had a mantra, okay, just to go off
Yeah,
track for a second,
please.
and my mantra was that good decisions, bad decisions, and even if they're not my decisions, I had to take responsibility or credit for them. So even if it's a negative, I had to take the blame.
Hmm.
And my logic was very simple, very simple. If I didn't, people would go around me. They would diminish the role I was in because they wouldn't see me as the final arbiter. And if I'm not the final arbiter, people always defer to the person who's going to get or try to contact the person who's going to get the job done.
Right.
So there's a lot of things that I had to take responsibility for that I was not actually responsible for or completely disagreed with, but did in order to maintain that sense of authority over my job and area. And no regrets, but it's just the way it works, you know? It's just the way it works.
Dude, that's some masterclass shit right there. That's worth the price of admission. Take responsibility for it because you don't want people going up and around you. You never blame up. You always. Oh, that's get it, dude. All right, there you go. As far as I'm done. I've already gotten as much as I need out of this.
But that's the way it works. That's why, and you
That's
got to
smart.
understand too. And you got to understand too that when you're in these jobs, it's not about you. You know, if you're doing 40, 60, 70, 80 books on a monthly basis, how are you going to do everything to your taste? You know,
No.
you can't be the
Yeah.
single sole arbiter of everything. That's why I always laugh. I'm like, well, you think I didn't like it? Well, then why'd you publish it? Because I'm not buying all these things. I'm hoping somebody else is. You know, and you got to do different flavors, different tastes outside of your own interests in order to get the opportunity to broaden out your audience as much as possible. But
Yeah.
you got to take responsibility for everything. I always used to set myself up as the block because I know the distraction and I know the insecurity of a freelancer. It was extraordinarily insecure. That if they'll start doubting themselves very quickly if you don't find a way to deflect that and keep them focused on all their energy. But they'll also go around you if they don't, you know, they're going to play mama off of daddy if any chance they can in order to get what they want too, you know? So,
Sure. 100%. 100%. All right. I do want to, man, someday I'm going to buy you a drink and hear the rest of that story. But in the meantime, I want to double tap on something you just said earlier. You were talking about Wizard Magazine and
yeah,
the role that Wizard Magazine had in our industry up until, it was no longer being published. I have
right.
certain pet theories. If I had my way, at some point I would do like a deep dive and like explainer video about why Wizard Magazine was the reason that comics worked so well
Yeah.
during that period. But I'd love to hear some from you. What your relationship was with them and what were they and what did we lose more importantly when we lost them?
You know, I'm not even. It's not even. You lost the hype, you lost the excitement, you lost the personality of comics in a way. You know, people didn't like it. I mean, and you look at everything now is reflective, introspective, histories of. Nothing's foreshadowing, forward, and just world building. And you know, if you look at it, and I actually did the reason why I was able to build that relationship with Wizard. I actually did some writing for them while I was working in TV because again, I go back to my interest in comics. I did all these little things on the side, you know, and I did a little work uh, for Dynamic Forces for a little bit. Did some work from Wizard, you know, when they had an entertainment retailing magazine. And I did some stuff along there because I liked the business, but also it was a way for me to connect with the comics. I used to when I was at ABC, I used to set up softball games with Marvel and DC just so I could meet the people that worked in comics.
You set up those softball games?
That was me, yeah.
I should have put you in charge. when I realized that it was going to happen this year, the Comics Pro event was going to happen in Glendale this year, I said, we have to have a softball game. I don't think anybody
Yeah.
else took it up. Yeah.
No. We used to set. We used to be there. They used to have. Oh man, the people used to have. Fabian was a shortstop. We used to fight all the time. It was great.
Yes.
When I was at ABC, we still joke about it.
I have no doubt.
Yeah,
I have no doubt.
Yeah.
But yeah, so but that relationship though with Wizard,
Yeah.
I mean, did you guys feel it? Did you know?
It was a focal point for the industry. You know what I mean? It was a place where everybody could go to get information. It created the hot and cool list, whether you liked it or not. It was our Billboard top 10. It was all these things to generate interest and excitement of what was going on here, because they were projecting what was going to be exciting more so than just rehashing, a famous, Neil Adams story from 1968, and it was much more interesting for the people coming on board to anticipate what's going on. It was the single spot to go to. It had a lot of imitators, but that's the one that had the personality and the drive. So much so that we had, over the course of the time I was out at DC, we must have hired over a half dozen or more people off of Wizard to come join us at DC Comics, because we felt they were so good at their jobs and so cared about the business. We wanted to bring that energy to the books themselves that we were producing.
Yeah.
That's
wonderful. All right, so I'd like to then jump, because we've already been at this for an hour, and I know I don't want to take too much advantage of your time, but so I do want to jump ahead, talk about the end for you at DC. Let's, I mean, and I'm not looking to scratch at dirty laundry or anything, but however much you could talk about, like what were those final months and days like for you?
The final months were rough. I mean, I had 3 bosses within a 1-year period of time, and it got further removed. Jim and I, what was interesting is that Jeff had moved on. Jim had been moved into the creator position over there, dealing with some of that. So he was that, and quite honestly, there was a couple of break points, which I won't go into, but the one thing I can say that's intriguing is there was a point there I was pulled aside by one of the bosses that came in later on, and basically said, we want you to keep the publisher title, but we don't want you involved in publishing. We want you involved and help establish an international marketing presence for comics, because we want to use comics as an international digital marketing tool for our characters. And I'm like, what? And was push your responsibilities down, and that's what you're going to be. And I said, not what I signed up for. I said, not what I moved for, not what I signed up for. It's not going to happen. So as soon as that conversation took place, I knew I was on a ticking clock, Yeah. So part of what I wanted to do was get something like a machine in place that could just be pushed, so when I get out of the way, it just runs on its own. And that's a lot of that conversation with that 5G was. 5G it's simplified in the discussions because everybody boils it down to Batman or Superman, but it was much more complex than that. It was about changing how we distribute, changing the formats of the type of books we were going to do. It was about changing the characters, setting up a much more effective timeline, rebuilding our entire collection edition program to reflect multiple timelines. It was a whole big strategy, And when I see DC Finest, that's an offshoot of that in some version, in its own way. And I see a little bit here and a little bit there, but I don't really follow it because I understood how it worked in totality.
Right.
But when I see the pieces, they were all, in my mind, all interconnected. So I can't do a piece without another piece, without another piece. I have to see the whole thing. So when you give me a fragment, it's a fragment and I'm not interested. I lost interest. But that's what I was going towards. It was coming to. I knew it was coming to an end. I hit my 60th birthday. I got remarried. And I said, this is a good time to start getting ready to wind it all down. And sometimes people do different things. I could say I might say, I might have taken a suicide by memo, might have been called it. Might be the nicest way to say it. But
what was the memo about?
Just a pointing out some inconsistencies in conversations.
In my mind, this is your like, what is it? Not network news. What was it? Broadcast. What was that movie where he just like comes out? He's like, I'm just mad as hell, right? Just gonna just let you all have it.
I've never left any job gracefully, so no point where to start now. But I knew that was the end. So that was, and it came to fruition. No surprise. And the irony, the most ironic thing, is when I was out, I didn't know what to do with myself. Because you were running at 1,000 miles an hour, and then all of a sudden you're at zero. And I was on an internal vibration that would have gotten me to Earth 2 if there was still a cosmic treadmill to be found. But I hate using those references. What the hell?
Oh, you'd love it. You would immediately go to it. You just hate yourself when you make them. You're like, oh.
Yeah. And lo and behold, I'm out of DC, and in 2 weeks after I leave DC, the entire world stops. COVID hits.
I know. I was just looking at that timeline. You're out in February. In March, the whole world shuts down. 2 weeks.
2 weeks. 2 weeks after, the whole world shuts down. Which I said, that was very nice of them. So now I didn't feel like I had to keep up with anything. But more importantly, it gave me a chance to stop, and I didn't realize how exhausted I was. And I literally shut down for 6 months with the inability to move. I didn't realize how exhausted I was. And it took me a while to really recharge that battery, to get back going again, because I was fried. I didn't realize how fried. I used to start my workday playing Oingo Boingo's Dead Man Party every morning as a motivational tool.
It's okay that we're dead, baby, but we're gonna rock.
It's just somebody's gonna find the body at the door. That's all it is.
Oh man, listen, I can only imagine. I've had those jobs, and I'm lucky enough now that I don't feel like I have a bit more control over that for myself. But I know how easy it is to get into there, and how much juice comes from that. Right?
Oh yeah,
that's the thing.
The hardest thing is, the two hardest things are, you're getting paid well, okay? So it's hard to walk away from that, and that's a corporate trap for everyone. It's that stability and salary and security that comes along with it. It gives you the fear to try anything else. But on top of that too, you kind of love what you're doing. You kind of, but and I say this jokingly, but it's not a joke. I knew when we were making Supergirl Evil for the 4th time, I knew we were we hit a creative point. And there's a spot there that a lot of times my success comes from when I'm raging against the machine. And then when you realize you're the machine, there's a stop and realize the force of introspection and confusion that you give to people, because you represent a certain thing that you're railing against to the people you're speaking to. So that's got to be hard on folks. It's like, and I realized, sometimes, you got to take a step back and sometimes a step away. And, then I was at an age and a comfort level that I had that sense of enough security to make that choice. If anybody's ever worked with me, they know me for my whiteboards. I used to keep whiteboards of everything. And I've got photos of them from Crisis on Infinite, from Infinite Crisis all the way to the 5G stuff. And, it's my personal timeline.
Aren't those great? I look back on my own whiteboard, like when you have a team and you're all breaking a problem and it's all those ideas, and then you just look back on them.
So everyone in my office had a whiteboard in, and we sit there and rattle it out. And that actually came from my days of working on Reboot. We used to have a whiteboard, a printable whiteboard. So you'd write on it and you could print out what was on it. And there was that one day we were coming up with the web writers, and which is this last storyline arc of his 3rd season. And Brendan McCarthy is this brilliant artist, just brilliant. Brendan McCarthy's on the whiteboard sketching, and we're all sitting there looking, and we're like, not really. And then somebody screams. Somebody screams in the room, Dormammu! It's like Dormammu's dimension! And Brendan's like, oh, yes, of course. They're the mindless ones. And all of a sudden he's throwing this shit. And all of a sudden I'm like, that's the way it's supposed to be. That's how you create. That's why, for me, that's why I don't think I would have survived COVID, because I probably would have been arrested going to everybody's houses trying to get them to work together as a group because I didn't want to work over over a conference call or any of these things. I would have been knocking on people's windows, going crazy, doing all sorts of crazy shit that gets you arrested.
Have you? This is a side question. We may even cut this out. Have you ever played with Miro? You know what Miro is? It's a whiteboard applicator.
No.
I was just at a story conference. We were breaking this thing for a publisher I'm working for, and a couple of people you know Fred Van Lente and Joe Keating.
Yes.
And so I'm working with these guys, and we have just like on the giant TV, this Miro board. It's just a whiteboard, and like ideas are going up there and being switched around, moved around. And it was like I was in a conference room, like really breaking a problem. First time since I've been not been working in an office like that.
Right.
It was awesome. It was so good.
That's the shit I love, And we used to be there. I used to have a ball set with Reboot, and we fought like the coyote and the sheepdog. We'd be screaming at each other all day, and then at the end of the day, we'd go to the club and we'd drink and smoke and do this whole stuff, and we have a great time. I love when I'm in the creatives. I get blinders. All I see is the creators. I forget even who I'm talking to some of the times. Which naturally is that creates problems. But I get very, very tunnel vision about what the creative what needs to happen, how we need to make it work. And not that I don't listen to opinions, but I get very focused, and we have to take it apart and rip it apart and rip it apart. And you only get that energy face to face. You only get that really. It's something. And I think that's the part of comics I love. And the fact that if comics aren't doing that at this moment, then I don't miss it, because I wouldn't be working the way I like to work. I love the interaction and the conversations and the meetings and just the ramblings of all these ideas. Because when we did the DCU, we really pushed top down. We came up here, coming up with what do we need, what types of books, and pushed it down and see what comes back. And it was a fascinating process. And had a lot of fun doing it because it had some sort of focus, but it still had the room to create its own energy and its own personality, so it wasn't completely managed from top to bottom.
Yeah, 100%. I definitely feel that, and have been lucky enough to experience some of that, and I totally feel you on that. That is the juice that I miss. Well, but since then you've stepped back and you've been writing more, but I'd love to hear about your experiment with Frank Miller.
Oh, it was a blast. Well, Frank became my COVID buddy. So I used to go visit my kids in Jersey and then go stop and visit Frank. And we talk all the time, just about comics. Honestly, there's no better. I don't even know what to say. It's an experience that it's unlike anything else. Sitting there just talking comics, from the history of comics, and we just sit there for hours, and we're talking about what's lacking in comics and what we want to do. And one of the things that both Frank and I locked in on was craft, about the craft of making comics, about how that's not as prevalent as it was earlier on. Frank was mentored and tutored by folks like, Neil Adams and Will Eisner. And Frank tells a story about how Neil kicked him out of his office 4 times, telling him he had no talent to go back to Vermont or wherever and just, become whatever you do there. And Frank kept on coming back. And then on the 4th trip back, Neil said, now you're good enough. Neil literally picked up the phone, called up DC, give this guy 8 pages of work, and they did. That's how it worked in those days, And Neil would give him ideas. And then if you talk to people like, then with Frank, he had a studio with Howard Chaykin and Jeffrey Jones and Walt Simonson. They're working together. And I saw some of that with Jim at Wildstorm. And I think that's what that jazzed me about Wildstorm the most. Jim was in an artist room, and they were all doing this. And they're all drawing, and you can see them, and the competitions. There's a competition in that room. Don't kid yourself. They're looking over each other's shoulders, and they're trying to pick up. You know what I mean? And there's an energy that comes with it that just pumps up the artwork. Everybody wanting to be better than just so insular and focused on their individual vision. They're really trying to be a sponge and take it all in and be bigger than their own self. But so I got that time with Frank, and so we both agreed to craft. So we thought we were going to start a little company that we would be able to bring people in, and Frank would train them, and the whole concept was to bring new talent in, bring them to Frank, that he could give them a bottom-up tutorial on how to work with it. And it was a good idea at the start. The industry was really tight, marketplace was really tight, a lot of new books coming out. But at the end of the day, Frank's an independent artist. And once he started drawing himself, he just wanted to draw, And it wasn't about grading, it was about drawing, and made it hard.
Yeah.
To do more than just 1 or 2 books. So I really said to him, and I'll say this here, I said, my friendship with you is more valuable to me than this company. For the company to work, we're going to be at odds. I'd rather be friends with you than have a company, to be honest. And,
Sure.
That's
Sure.
For me, that's a choice. That's an easy choice every time you make it. It's as simple as that. And, and ultimately, part of me just wanted to try my hand. I did a novel, and I had some people help me lay it out. And the new one, I'm doing on my own, 100%. And, I don't know if it's a success or not, but it's something I want to do. And it's at this point, that's kind of what I want to do. It's like I kind of enjoying myself, I'm help every once in a while I get called into consulting here or there. But the reality is, it's just about doing what you enjoy now. And we had a rough year. I had a rough year. I had a little bit of a health issue. I had some people with real health issues around me. Some of the closest people I know went through some really rough times this year. And it makes you really reevaluate what's important and what's not, and right now, what's important to me, wouldn't be arguing about whether or not Superman has shorts on or not. You know what I mean? I don't care if he wants to go naked, I'm good, man. I'm good with it,
It's totally fine. Who's going to argue with Superman? You know what?
Yeah.
Who's going to argue? Yeah.
Nobody.
It's the Dr. Manhattan principle.
And
if you're that powerful.
He can hear everything, so you can't really talk about him. So you got to be really real careful what you do with him.
What's interesting is, actually, I'm gonna connect 2 threads here together and go backwards again for a minute. I just mentioned Dr. Manhattan, and
No, it's bad. Sorry, I'm over here again.
Oh, that's okay. The sun. You're just gonna run from the sun.
It's killing me. Sun's killing
me. Anyway, I heard this in talking about competition. I heard this rumor that when you guys were doing, I think it was after Watchmen or whatever that series was. I can't remember the name of it.
Before Watchmen.
Right. Before Watchmen. You had all of these different artists that were all working on different books, right? And the rumor I heard was they were all putting it into the same communal Dropbox so that everybody could see everybody else's pages.
Yes.
Which caused them all to go, well, fuck. Now I got to bring my game up.
Yep.
That's brilliant. That is just like a master stroke. That's
because ultimately there's a story. There's a thing that happens in comics, okay? And in editorial. Okay? There's a thing. And it happens every once in a while. A page comes in that knocks an editor's socks off. So much so that he takes the page and he walks it around and shows it to the other editors.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And when the other editors see it, they go, holy shit, that looks great. That's a book I want to read. Oh, that's a book that I want to see. Oh, fuck, I want to do. Now you know this is what I'm up against. And it gets us as comic people jaded, excited, and there's that page. And that's the stuff that gets me excited. My very first, speaking of Frank Miller, very first meeting with Frank Miller, in Bob Schreck's office. Frank's bringing in pages. Dark Knight Strikes Again, the second Dark Knight. It's post 9/11. And Frank's works on double-side boards, these big boards. And he pulls out a page of art. First time I ever saw an original page of Frank Miller art. And Frank goes, I wanted to get this visceral feel, so I dipped nails in inks and I raked them over the page. And I went, raked. I just remember him going, like he was murdering the page with these nails. And I'm like, wow. And I'm looking at the page above. I'm like, okay, this is what we're getting into. And I never forgot that. Never forgot that. So many crazy moments. Never forgot that.
Oh, God, that is. As a lifelong Frank Miller fan and occasional apologist, as many of us have to be because we're fans.
Yeah, it's okay. You know what? Listen, it's not even worth it. Not even not even a discussion. This stuff, I go back and I reread this stuff, and the problem right now with most people is they have no context of what they're talking about. Yeah. And to understand Dark Knight, or even more importantly, Daredevil, we associate Frank with DC, but Frank's body of work is at Marvel before going to do Sin City and things like that outside of there. But he has a body of work at Marvel. And you look at some of his stuff over there, and the Daredevil side, he did a couple of Spider-Mans that, my God, some of my favorite Spider-Man pages of art in the annuals that he did with Doctor Strange and shit like that. I'm like, stuff is brilliant, just brilliant. And I just love his story about how, Daredevil's going to be canceled, so they gave him the book to write and draw because nobody gave a shit. Because I heard the same story from Jim Starlin on Captain Marvel. And God, I wish I was able to have that moment with somebody, get that lightning in a bottle once. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But yeah, it's just something beautiful about it, and something so exciting about it. And when you look at these things, you look at the 80s and what comics were and how people perceived them and how they reinvented the friggin' wheel. You know what? You get a pass, dude. I'm sorry. You created more for this business, and for that we thank you. That's 100%.
Yeah, 100%. All right, so I want to talk kind of broader, but before we do, I have many of my friends in this industry would give me a hard time if I didn't bring up something, which is you and I had a fight once at a Comics Pro. We had an argument, like a yelling at each other, talking over each other argument at a Comics Pro meeting. It was me.
I did not know that. I didn't know that.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
New Orleans or somewhere like that, or Nashville, or one of those ones. Whatever.
Something.
Yeah,
and as I remember, at the time I was on wanting, I was a retailer and I wanted there to be like content labeling on the books.
Yes.
Because, it was about the time that Frank was putting out the goddamn Batman, and, was there a dick? Was there not a dick? Like, there was always the moment. I'm like, just give me a label.
By the way, every one of those things has a story. You know that, right? There's a story behind
all Believe me. I'm looking at the clock thinking, how many of these can I scratch at? But you and I had this argument.
Yeah.
And at the time, I'm like, fuck this guy, how dare, whatever. And my favorite part about that moment is I'm standing there, like I'm working the mics, so nobody's taking the mic out of my hand. And so like everybody's looking around like, who's going to stop it?
Hold on. I'm out of the light now.
Okay, good. And I feel a touch on my shoulder, and it's Brian Hibbs of all people saying, "You said your piece, sit down." I'm like, oh shit. When Brian tells you to sit down, it must be done. Anyway,
it's only because he wanted the mic for himself.
Probably not wrong. But I tell that story not to like dredge up all things, but A, to acknowledge it, but B, to think, to say, like, you came into comics seemingly, basically from the outside. I mean, you're a comics fan, but you didn't like come up in the ranks of like a comics publishing company, right? And so as a result, like, you were suddenly exposed to all of these people with opinions and had zero problem sharing them. I gotta think that was an adjustment for you, but maybe not. You seem really capable with conflict.
Two things.
So
my very first retailer connection. Okay, very first one. I'm at one of our infamous RRPs, DC's RRPs. First one I'm invited to, and I'm all pumped up, ready to go, ready to tell them you're going to change the world. You know, don't know what the hell I'm talking about. Who gives a shit? I just talk fast. You know, but I go up to one retailer, and I still don't know who he is. Don't remember. And I go, I'm here. I'm new. I'm learning all this, and I want to learn from you. I want to know how we can make you more money. More money. That's what I said to him. How do we make you more money? And the retailer looks at me and goes, I don't want to make more money. I just don't want to make less money. And that was my first retailer interaction.
Well, yeah. That's
my
in
very first
a nutshell, isn't it?
Yep, that's it. So I said, okay. And that's where we were. So when we were arguing about ratings, I'm going to tell you right now, I didn't care. I was used to ratings from working in children's programming. I have done ratings all the time. I don't have a problem with it. The reality is the talent had a problem with it, and I was protecting the talent. Simple as that.
I look back on it, and I realize now that that's what you were doing.
Argument. Yeah, because if it comes from the talent, it sounds arrogant. If it comes from the company, it sounds like a mandate. That's all.
Totally makes sense, and I think but that's just it. Like part of the problem was I think I was caught up in this sort of game of gotcha that that you know, and that sort of retailer to publisher interaction tends to devolve to.
Oh no, listen, it's you know, when you're making, if I looked at before I left when I left DC, somebody came to me and said, between collected editions and periodicals, my name's on approximately 17,000 to 18,000 books, somewhere in a masthead. Okay, 17,000 to 18,000. And I can give you rule of thumbs on everything I can do, and everybody can hit me up with the one exception. And why don't you play to the exception all the time? And the reality is, it's the exception, not the rule. And every time we went to an exception and tried to make it the rule, we failed. Because the rules are in place for a reason, and they work for a reason. But when it comes to ratings, like I said, my final years at, my final years at ABC Children's Programming, I was up against the Million Moms. Remember when the Million Mom March and all that stuff and all the, I was up against those guys. And that was a lot more difficult. I fought with broadcast standards every day. I had to do educational cartoons, of one of which was Free Willy, where the whale talked. And I had to convince people that this was educational. So I knew what it was like to make these compromises, and it's just part of the job, and a rating system is a rating system. The truth is, I only truly wish that we had that wide an audience where the rating system could actually work, instead of such a narrow audience that we're just preaching to the same small group. And
100%.
There's no reason to put a rating on it, because we're not reaching anybody in any of those other areas that we're trying to identify, and that's
100%.
That's the other side. Those are the realities that for some reason we don't verbalize when we should be talking about how do we make this different, about where the problems really lie,
I do. I struggle with that so much now that I'm in publishing and working with public retailers and back and forth, in that, why are we arguing about this when we should be focusing on how to make your shop better, right? We should be focusing on how to get more people in there. Let's focus on that for a minute.
Listen, I used to joke, but not joke. The industry is run by hobbyists, not by business. We don't have any central governing bodies. We don't have any rules. We don't have any organizational skills. We set up awards that if the people don't like the people giving awards, they start their own awards, because we are so busy just worried about getting our opinion heard and our point of view across, that we really don't care about what the overall sensibility is of the entire business or industry is, or how do we direct that, or how do we manage that. And there's no governing bodies, there's no governing sensibilities, there's nothing brings any sort of uniformity. That's when we go back to Wizard. Wizard, at the moment, was the one thing that was a center, a hub, that we were able to all move in and out of with some level of certainty that we were reaching our audience and moving in a correct path. You remove that hub away and we all diffused. And, that's, it's good for creativity. It's good for an expansion of concepts. I just don't know whether or not it works. That's all. Be honest.
Yeah. No, I'm with you. I'm with you. You know, it feels like we're in the middle of another transition period, much like that.
Yeah,
That
it's a
period,
good thing.
and
Yeah,
so I'd like to get some of your opinions on this now. I mean, now that you have been as inside can be for 20 years, and you've been outside now for what I guess what
yeah.
5 years now, coming up on 5.
I mean, almost, yeah, yeah.
Um, yeah. Where do you think Diamond went wrong?
Well, they didn't pivot right away as soon as DC left. That's the first part. Um, there probably should have been a reorganization right from game one. It's hard because you know everybody,
Yeah.
but when you go from X share to a fraction of that share, you have to scale your business in conjunction with that. That's the first part. And the second part is um, we've never really cultivated. We've talked about it. I've gone to so many meetings about how we're going to grow the business, the infamous grow the business meetings. We have panels on that every year. There are a lot of people, a lot of the same people saying the same things every year. And nobody does really anything about it. I sat in a meeting once with some of the Marvel folks. We weren't allowed to collude, as everybody said. We were so worried about what we can't do than wondering about what we can do. I had more people making fun of me for trying to put comics in Walmart than understanding what I was trying to accomplish by putting comics in Walmart. You know, um,
Yeah.
which is silly, but it doesn't matter at the end of the day. But that's what I was talking to you before about from Diamond's point of view. If I lose a large portion of business, I have to reevaluate my entire business, not just a portion of it. Closing one distribution location might solve a financial problem, but creates some new problems. It's about
Yeah.
speed of delivery and longer freight and things of that nature. And there's only so much expense every person could take on. And the cost of shipping is going up. The less that you put in a box, the more expensive it gets. And comparatively, and you just gotta look at all this. You gotta stop and just go. You need that. The problem with us, I worked in soap operas before I worked in animation.
How did we not dig into that? Okay. Anyway, yes.
Yeah. I was actually friends with people like Kelly Ripa and Sarah Michelle Gellar when they were on All My Children and things like that, and a lot of guys I was with. So I used to work in soap operas, and I used to sit in and watch the writers' meetings. And one of the things that I've always associated soap operas with comics are we don't take any time off. Like when I was in animation, you do 13 episodes, you wrap it up, and now you got 9 months to get the next season ready. So you can get a chance to refigure, reformulate. Here, you're changing the wheels on a moving car, with comics. In distribution, same thing. You're changing wheels on a moving car. You can't say, hey, listen, I'm not going to put out comics for 3 months while I figure something out. But that's sort of what's happening now, Unfortunately, you have to go to such extremes to make that happen instead of trying to address it before it happens, and hopefully the decisions and the choices that are made for the better of what's going on, and hopefully for a healthier market. I think, I'm gonna go deep into a rabbit hole, so forgive me for 5 seconds.
Please.
I think we've lost 2 to 3 generations of readers. I've been saying this for a while. I used to say 2 generations. I'm going to go to 3. I think that we've so focused on our past that we've completely compromised our future in some bizarre ways. And the reality is, and as a retailer, again, I can say this now because I'm whatever. Maybe we have to look past the stores, maybe, to reach new people if we can't bring them into it. It's just what it is. Maybe the format that we're choosing is not the right format anymore. Maybe the periodical that exists, the shape that it's in, it's maybe my father's comics, and that's it. All I know is we have this entire generation of 40, 50, 60, 70-year-olds that became fans when they were 10-year-olds, and we're not creating anything for the 10-year-olds to become fans when they were 40, 50, and 60. We're so busy placating and servicing the older fan base and trying to please them because that's where the money is at the moment.
Yeah.
and we don't know how to sell anymore to younger fans, and they're going elsewhere to the point that now we just become daddy's things. And all I know is that when you become daddy's things, when the kids are old enough to make their choice, they're going to want their stuff and not dad's, as much as they love being with their parents.
Is there no transitioning this Dogman, Raina Telgemeier generation
you know what?
to?
I think there's something there. I think there's something there. Dogman, again, I keep on seeing exceptions. Wimpy Kid, Dogman. There's stuff out there, you know. The question is, how do you build something out of that? Look at that format. Has anybody? The craziest thing, the craziest thing I hear is that we constantly keep on treating other distribution as just the dumping ground. You know, we don't build new for that. You know, somebody told me from DC that Primer was a good breakout, and I said, of course, a breakout. It's an original friggin' idea in an original format. It has a chance to be found by somebody that's not being spoon-fed the same crap in a different version, you know, over and over again. You know, that's the stuff. I mean, I used to die by that sword. I would still die by that sword. When I got to DC, my first statement was, we got to be something more than superheroes. DC Comics, when I was reading them in the 70s, was 40% superhero, 60% other. And the 60% other is what made that company, in my mind, great besides Superman and Batman and Wonder Woman. Okay? Simply.
And this was in the 70s, right? Everybody wants to talk about how it was like post Mad, Gainer, like suddenly everything was just superheroes. No, it was not.
It was not. No, and there was Young Love, there was Love Comics, there was War Comics, there was Western Comics, there was Horror Comics. It was all these wonderful things. When we went to the direct market, and I've heard this story, so I believe it's true. When we went to direct market, the direct market people were mostly fans and hobbyists creating stores to protect their collections and the comics they're buying, and what they wanted was superheroes. And what DC did would cancel a successful non-superhero book off the newsstand and reallocate those resources to create another superhero book for the direct market, even though it might have sold at a fraction of what the other book sold on the newsstand, because it wasn't as profitable because there's a lot of waste. So when the newsstand goes away, it takes away all these other formats, because we did the deep dive into superheroes. And then by the time you get into the 80s and Marvel's controlling 60 to 80% of the market at that point with just a superhero line, everything is focused on that. And now we're starting to break out, but now we're dealing with such fractions of an audience, it doesn't have the appreciable weight. You know, should Walking Dead be driving a different type of product? Maybe. You know, I don't know. We got to see. But we should be always trying to build stuff other than just superheroes. And I think you're starting to get there now, but we're still using all the trappings of the format and the distribution and the style of what we did for the superheroes. So you hear these gears grinding a little bit, and we need a fresh break from a lot of this. That's just my opinion. And that's these are the things you think about when you're, changing diapers for the grandkids, because your kids leave them when I go over to visit my kids, and all I got is the grandkids, because they go out because they don't want to be around. They want to be out when I'm over there.
Listen, as a man who has a 10-year-old, I can tell you when the grandparents are interested, that's great. That's awesome. See you later.
I'm always there. I can't help it. I'm a big sucker for that stuff, man.
I have no doubt. It feels like we're cycling kind of around. I will tell you, I want to just make a list of all of the controversies and all of the moments maybe there should be a series. No, but is there anything like you want to? All right, let's deal with. I'm going to pick one at random. Goddamn Batman. The censored blocks. Let's deal with that. What's the story there?
Okay, they said this. The goddamn Batman one. Which one? Yeah. Not because it's the same problem. Penis Batman and cursing Batman and All-Star Batman. Same problem.
Okay.
Color of the black ink that was on the bottom of the page was darker than the cover black ink that we put over it, so it bled through when it printed out.
You think you would have learned the first or second time?
Well, the first time was The first time it was a mistake. The second time with the penis Batman, partially my fault. I'll take part blame to that because the book was very muddy, and I don't like muddy comics. I'm tired of muddy comics because what happens now is with all the coloring being done digitally, people are looking at digital screens, backlit. So a lot of stuff looks brighter on the screen than it does on paper. When it gets to paper, front lit, doesn't look good. Book comes on my desk, muddy. I say, can we brighten this book up a little bit? Could bring down the grades a little bit. Little did I know that the artist drew a penis on Batman, Bruce Wayne. Didn't know. And you know what I don't look for when I read a book? Penis on Batman.
Penises?
No, I really don't. When you're reviewing, 5, 6, 7, 10 books a day, penis, not top of my...
There's not a filter. You don't like immediately do your penis scan.
So I didn't see the penis. And by the way, the best part about it is one of those new bosses, that was her first day. And I said, hi, nice to meet you. Oh, and by the way, we just printed a penis on Batman. So what do you want to talk about now?
And the break room's over there. And
strangely, that set the tone for our relationship.
I have no doubt. All right. I'm trying to think. What are the other salty ones? You do anything else you want to set the record straight on?
No. Here's the thing. There's no such thing as setting the record straight. That's a fallacy. I can tell you every story, explain everything in length, make perfect sense, and nobody gives a shit. They just remember it the way they want to remember it. So why mess with people's memories? They hold them so fondly. Of you. I don't want to be the guy to break their hearts.
It's very generous of you. When you look back on comics in general, your time as at DC, is there an overarching lesson? Like, is there a piece that you kind of wish you knew going in, or is there something that you like? If you in the same way that, like, if you were like, say you're the president of the United States and you're stepping away from the desk and you put the envelope in the drawer, what would that be?
It's hard to say. There's a couple of do you have regrets? Is not the word, but would you do things slightly different? Maybe. But this goes back to the controversies and all that. And I'm going to say this in a more overarching way. It's easy to focus and say, why did you do this then? Why did you do this? Why did you make that choice? What you don't know is how many different things went into making that decision that were occurring at that particular moment in time. Pressure from person over here, pressure from person over here, creative choices, business choices, timing choices, other product choices. You don't know what's happening. But you're taking all these things, you're moving quickly, you're making 100 decisions a day, and you have to stop and say, this is the best way to handle this at this particular moment in time. And that's the way it works. That's just what happens. And can you replay that? If I went back and reset the clock, all those variations might change and something else might change, and you get a different result. And I don't know if these failures over here lead to these successes over here. So it's hard to change anything, really. At the end of the day, you want to do things. I could tell you straight out this stuff. Like I said, we never set out to do anything poorly. Maybe the biggest decision I made was to move Countdown to Final Crisis up a year, because I needed a book at that moment in time, because I needed to make a budget at that time, because ultimately what happened, we were so successful for a couple of years that I actually made the same profitability producing 700 books as I did 1,100 books the following year. So I made more money with less product, and people go, well, just keep making less product. And I said, that product sold because it was tied to a moment in time with a product amount of books. And therefore, going forward, it was very hard to do. When we did 52, the weekly series, we sacrificed schedule on the main line so that 52, the weekly series, would run properly. Did it hurt the main line? Probably. But was it the right choice? Probably. It's you have these challenges constantly every day. The only thing I regret, I'll say it. I said I know I have regrets. I'm going to say one thing I regret. I regret giving in to hallway judgment calls. The staff knew me that if I'm walking the halls, I have a very set purpose and I'm moving somewhere. So somebody goes over here, and you walk down the hall and somebody grabs you. They go, "Hey, listen, I got," and you're like, "Okay, fine." And then 2 weeks later, the book hits your desk and like, "Who made this? What the hell is this?" Well, you said fine. I said, "When did I say fine?" In the hall, when we were walking down the hall, I said, "Oh, God damn it, you guys. You keep on grabbing me in the halls and asking me to do shit. I don't know what the fuck I'm talking about. I'm trying to go over here and get this other thing taken care of." That's the only one I would do differently. They forced a lot of backtrack in the place.
No, I love it. The hallway judgment call. There's a chapter in your leadership book. Just avoid the hallway judgment call.
Don't ever make decisions in the hallway. That is probably the most important thing I'll ever teach anyone. Don't do that. You say, "Come back, meet him at desk, set up an appointment, come back and we'll talk about it." Hey, you're on. That's what I couldn't do that. I wanted to get shit done.
Keep moving. Oh, that is beautiful. I usually end these with interviews with 2 questions, and I feel like one of them you've already answered. And the first one I always ask is, what is the biggest threat facing comics? And I feel like you've already answered that: the lost generations of readers, right?
That's a huge threat. I have 2 stories. The first story is when I got to DC. When I got to DC, I was just, I was more like a fly on the wall. And I went to the last WonderCon in Oakland. Okay. And I go into the room. I tell the story. It's one of my favorites. I go into the convention room, and it's this big room. And there's about 50 people in it with 7 of our best talent up on stage. And every question directed at the stage was about archives. Okay. Collections. Not about what they were working on, about collections. And then the one guy stands up and he goes, "Are you going to collect all the All-Star comics before I die?" Exact words. And I sat back in the chair and went, "Holy fuck, our audience is going to die and nobody's going to be reading DC comics." I had this like panic attack. Like, what the fuck did I just get into comics for? They're going to be, all the readers are going to be dead. And I had this epiphany.
Excuse me, brother. I have an existential crisis. I'll answer your question in a minute.
We got to get young and we got to get fast. We got to get there fast. And we got to get back to core sensibilities, core story, core interest things, because we're so far down a rabbit hole with these characters. We got to get back and reset. And Paul Levitt said the words to me that was like, "Go ahead, do what you want. Play with them as much as you want. But when you're done playing with the toys, put them back the way you found them." Exact words. And I said, "Okay, I'm off." And then that's when I sit down with Jeff, and we start talking about Green Lantern, and we start talking about Teen Titans, and then then we get Greg Rucker involved, and we get Judd Winnick involved, and Judd was my main guy because he was the first guy that took the leap of faith to become exclusive at DC, show us that it's a place to be, and became that guy with the flag for me. And just like he would be like, any chance he'd go, "Yeah, let's give it a shot, let's do it." He was like the one to just go, "We got to try," and that level of energy just fed me, and we started going in. But the goal was to get the lapsed fans, get those guys in, and we got them back, and we got them back in a good manner. And the only downside was I was trying to get new fans, I couldn't get them, couldn't find them, and strangely, the only time I got new fans was New 52. That's when I saw the influx of new fans, and I always joke, I go to conventions now, and some guy comes up to me, they always do this, they lean in the table, goes, "I was a fan of New 52. Like that. And I go to them, "You don't have to whisper it anymore." You can actually say it out loud. It's okay. It's not something anybody's going to beat you up on anymore. Okay. But New 52 was a huge success for us. Whether people like it or not, it was a huge success. It did what it was supposed to do. And for me, it's interesting because I look at the period of time from Infinite Crisis to End of 52, the weekly series, as my sweet spot as an executive editor, and the launch of New 52 as my sweet spot as a co-publisher. Because I think those two match what my roles were at the time, and that's why they're different. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's as an executive editor, you're telling a story, creative story. And I was using the DC universe to tell a story. New 52, I was relaunching a company. We were relaunching the company with a new idea, a new sensibility, new identity. And that's why the two things are different, but each one accomplished the goal of the role I was in at the time.
Yeah. Listen, that is the piece of publishing that I have come to fall in love with, and I feel like you have the similar love of this solving problems with story, right?
Yeah.
We're looking at a corporate problem, we have a marketing problem, we have something, but we're going to solve it by sculpting a story that we're telling. I love that. Oh man, that's the juice.
It's about investment and ownership,
Mm-hmm.
and I find, the other joke I used to tell was the difference between people ask, what's the difference between Marvel fan and DC fan? The joke was, I said, a Marvel fan will read a bad book with the hope that it's going to be good. And a DC fan will drop a good book with the fear it's going to go bad. And that put my audience in a nutshell. DC fans were always, I don't know what their expectation was, but the bottom line is that you're always in competition with what you've done before in the past. And you're always going to be, well, it's not Dark Knight. I said, yeah, I know nothing's been nice in Dark Knight. Can we move on from that? This is pretty good stuff still, I'm over here. I get it. It's not Watchmen. Yeah, I get Watchmen. I know. Come on, let's move on. That's okay. Moment of silence, Watchmen. Go, move. Let's go. New stuff. And everybody always will find something that they remember gold from their past within DC's thing instead of buying into the story. So the goal was to put them on a path with a story that made sense. And, and the best compliment I ever got was, when somebody's cursing me out and they said, I can't believe you killed Blue Beetle, but honestly, the Countdown to Infinite Crisis is the best Blue Beetle story ever told until he dies. And I said, yes, thank you. Mission accomplished.
There you go. Thank you. You're welcome.
What? I don't know what to say.
So, all right. I always follow up the biggest risk question with what gives you hope? Right? You're still in it for comics. I can tell.
Listen. What gives me hope is we're still storytellers, and people still want story. End of story. How they're going to get it, what type of story they're going to get, that might be open for interpretation, but it's there. Let's. You want to play the long game? Let's play the real long game. Dime novels, pulp fiction, pulp stories, comic books. Something next. Where are we? What's the next thing? What's this over here? We don't know. The fun part's getting there. And what we need now is enough awareness that when something works, that's not an aberration, but a bellwether for the future. How do we jump on that bandwagon? Again, the comics in its day, low cost entertainment for the masses. We've gotten completely away from that. We don't do that anymore. That's not who we are. So we've gotten away from the inception idea of what comics are. We've moved on from that. Now we're about art. Now, I always say art should be by accident, not by planning. It's because we were a machine. So if something exceeds expectation and does it, that's a great thing. But don't go in with that expectation that you're making you're making the Sistine Chapel every time you make a comic book. That's a mistake. Because you're creating expectations that you might never meet, and everything else is going to come apart because of that. So the goal is to create things that excite people and people want more of in an affordable manner. And I think that's what's essential to the business, and that's the next thing that needs to be there. How do we get back to being affordable and exciting again, and being a leader in a conversation and the idea, and how do we get to places again? We used to create books and people found them. Now we're creating things and we have to find the people. We're out there looking for the people instead of the people looking for us in a weird way. And that's backwards. That's backwards. You're spending all your energy to attract someone or get their attention, and when you should be them looking for you, searching you out. I used to search comics out. I used to look for them.
Yeah.
Not, you know what I mean? I didn't now I don't know what's out, when, where, how, why, what anything's about. And that's a mistake, I think. It's a little lost its focus, but it's not to say it's lost. Things like, what's going to happen is someone's going to make money and everybody's going to go to it. But again, if you go back again, comics used to follow trends. As reading comics in the 70s, you got your kung fu is popular, and they got kung fu comics. You got all these things. $6 Million Man gets me Deathlock and Steel, and and all these things were built off for things that were successful, and nobody's following that thread like it used to. Now nostalgia is doing everything, and what's even worse is that superheroes on it, so we can't even imitate. We're imitating ourselves in a bizarre way, because ultimately we're and I'll go one step further. This is the weird one. Comics have always been counterculture, not pop culture. They've been counterculture. These are books that your parents want to throw away. These are things that kids embraced and young readers embraced because it was a statement against an older generation. And now we have the older generation wanting to read the kids' books. They're not discovering it on their own. They're being led down a path by their parents. And ultimately, it goes back to what my joke, another joke that I used to do at conventions, and parents used to come to me and said, I read DC comics to my kids. And I say, don't read DC comics to kids, read Marvel comics to your kids. I said, I want you to read Marvel comics to kids. That way, Marvel is daddy's characters and DC will be their characters. I want my kids to I want the kids to own our characters, not the parents, So,
I like that. I like that a lot. All right. Read Marvel comics to your kids. That's the takeaway.
Hey, listen, it worked in Miracle at 34th Street. Macy's kept on sending people to Gimbals, and they had better sales than ever.
100%. 100%. Dan, is there any place that we can send people that want to hear from you, or is there any particular cause or thing you want to put out?
I have a couple of these. I don't. God help me for saying this out loud. I don't enjoy social media. I find it tedious. I don't know why. It's nothing personal. It's not against anybody. It's just I kind of it's funny. I spent so little time doing things that I love that I'm spending a lot more time doing things I love now. You know what I mean? And worrying about what's being said and this and that. I feel guilty sometimes. Oh, you missed somebody's birthday online. I'm like, I don't know. They missed my birthday too, I guess. I have no idea. I can't tell anymore. I don't know.
They did.
It's okay.
Maybe they didn't.
It's okay.
It's okay.
We know how to reach each other. Listen, I got an Instagram account. I think people are finding me. I'm not as engaged comic book wise as much as people might think I am. Because I mean, people still send me DC pitches. And I'm like 5 years. They send me that, and they send me different things. People ask me to help them with portfolios, and I try to be as gracious as I can. To be honest with you, I've been so busy on some of my own stuff. Like even this interrupted something. I basically canceled all conventions for the most part. Canceled all conventions this year. All other interviews this year, mainly because I've been extraordinarily focused on writing, and I get angry at myself if I don't feel like I did do the best job I can do. And my last book did okay, not great. So I feel I could be better, or at least try to be better, at least have the confidence in it. So I honestly doubled and tripled down my own energies in writing just to see whether or not I could do it. To be perfectly honest, it's more about proving something to myself than to anybody else. I think that's what I'm probably more. And I'm my own worst critic, so you can only imagine how difficult it is to do things like that. But it's great to get a chance to do. It's great to be in a position that you're able to do something like that, something that I've never afforded myself that opportunity before.
Well, I can't wait to see the proof of that, and I have zero doubt in my mind that when you set your mind to it, your mind will make it happen. Well, Dan, I want to thank you so much for making the time for this today. I know that, as you said, this is taking you away from that passion, and I appreciate you spending just what little we could get.
Oh, no,
Because
and honestly, Adam, I like what you're doing. It's with the site and what you're doing and trying to set up an interesting point of information, because I think the only way the industry could be helped is with more knowledge and information right now. And that's something that's extraordinarily lacking in the business, because we're all making suppositions based on personal choice and whatever you read online. And we know that both of those are inconsistent in their reality. So basically, what they'd be nice to do is get some sort of level playing field, so at least you can get a base knowledge about what's happening. And that way, if you want to be in this business and want to succeed and want to see it be more than what it is, not just worry about your own individual book or your own individual product, and you want to see how this industry can be healthy and grow, you should be able to get something that can contextualize the business and find a way to present it in a manner that's digestible, but also be able to help you make decisions, govern your decisions moving forward. So that's why when I see what you're doing here, that's why I feel it was important to participate, because it's the right idea at the right time.
I want to say something pithy to that, but I have to say it feels nice to be seen, because that's exactly what we're trying to do, and I really do appreciate you mentioning that. I really do. Well, thank you, Dan. Thank you. This is wonderful.
No, my pleasure. Anytime. Sorry about arguing. I don't remember the argument. Actually, I do remember the argument. It's just in those early days, I was full of piss and vinegar, man. I was ready for a fight with anybody. You know what? Because we wanted to make sure DC had a personality and an attitude. We needed a swagger. I kept on saying we needed a swagger. We had to get out there and make sure that we weren't the guy that is left on the doorstep all the time. We had to be out there.
You did a great job of that. You did a great job. And when I look back on it, there's no ill will continues on from then. So
the funniest part about me, most people might not know this, because everybody takes everything so personal. I'm really not a very personal guy. If I have a decision, or I'm making a decision based upon what a creative or business choice is, and unfortunately, when you do things like that, a lot of people can't help but take them personal. But it's not. I try not to address it to anybody. I never really attacked people for who they are or what they were about. But if I had a problem with their product, I sure let them know. Sure, and boy, do we have some good ones on that.
I have no doubt. Well, Dan, I'm sure I'm going to develop a whole bunch of questions that I feel like someday we're going to have a round two, because you are I love this era for you, this chapter, this let's share it so that we can make it better.
It's funny. What I used to do is basically a document every year, laying out what the DCU was going to be, my vision, what story is. And I would talk to writers and editors, and we'll pick up everybody's information, see where they're all crisscrossing, and formulate something that felt in touch with what was happening in the real world as a backdrop, so it felt like it was timely. And I would produce that document every year. I would present it to the publisher. I'd share it with the talent, and we change it and we fix it. And then we use that as the baseline for what the DCU would be. If we were 50% close, 75% close, 25%, it was a starting point. Everybody says, why do you do it? I said, because we need some place to start. We just can't keep on pulling shit out of the air and pulling it together and fixing it on the go. Give us a starting point. So I used to do that. And I found all my memos that I did for the first 5 or 6 years. And it was fun to see what we did and what we didn't do. That was fun. And you ask these questions. You ask these questions about, what do you feel like it? And I look and I said, well, it probably would have been better if I did this or I didn't do that. Thank God we didn't do that. It's like crazy stuff along the lines, but it's interesting.
If I was a fan focused, channel, if I was really going after DC fans, the first thing I would want to do is look at those and talk through those with you.
Oh yeah, you could do that. Amazing. You could. Oh, it's fascinating, because it addresses a lot of things that fans don't like. In places you could see how it was supposed to be something else, but morphed along the way. And ultimately, it's that, like I said, it's a death by 1,000 cuts. You start somewhere, you make all these changes, and then when it's final, you're like, wow, we're so far off the mark, but we're already here, so we got to keep moving because we're on a timeline. So it's for me, it's just a reminder that the creative process is a working process always, And if you think that, I always said the last thing you ever want to do is first draft, last draft, thinking that your first draft is your last draft, and that was never the case. So don't get too in love with your first drafts ever.
That feels like some serious wisdom we can close on.
Yeah.
Thank you, Dan. Really appreciate it. And I'm legitimately coming after you for round 2 on those memos. That was so good. My name is Adam Freeman. This has been Comic Industry Insiders. If you are not liked and subscribed, you won't hear about our new live webcast when it goes up. And you won't hear about when Dan does do this round 2 because, listen, I'm going to hound him. Thank you, buddy.